On the faraway planet of Viridian, the air was fresh and filled with the soft hum of strange machines hidden beneath the ground. The sky above was a bright shade of blue with two suns shining warmly. The planet was quiet, but it held many secrets from a time long ago. Two young explorers stood at the edge of a large old ruin. Neil was tall and strong, with bright eyes full of hope. Mira, his friend, was clever and quick, always ready with a smile or a joke. They had traveled across many stars to reach this place. "This is it," Neil said, looking at the broken stone walls covered in green vines. "The place where the legendary sword is kept. I can feel it." Mira laughed softly. "You really believe the stories? A sword that holds great power? It sounds like a fairy tale to me." Neil smiled but did not answer. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the dry earth. In the middle of the ruin, under a beam of light, was a stone pedestal. On top of it rested an old sword, its blade shining, even though it looked very old. Neil reached out and took hold of the sword's handle. He pulled hard, but the sword did not move. He pulled again, harder this time, but it stayed stuck. Mira crossed her arms and smiled. "See? I told you. It's just a story. No one can pull that sword." Neil did not give up. He tried once more. His face showed a little strain, but the sword would not budge. "Maybe you're not the one meant to pull it," Mira teased. Neil looked at her and said quietly, "Maybe, but I will keep trying." Mira shook her head but did not say more. She watched him with a mix of amusement and curiosity. Suddenly, the stone pedestal began to glow softly, sending waves of light into the air. Neil stepped back, surprised, and Mira's eyes grew wide. "What is happening?" Mira asked, stepping closer. Neil looked at the glowing runes carved into the stone. "I think the sword is testing us. The story said the sword is protected by an ancient trial." Mira laughed nervously. "A trial? Sounds like a game." The ground beneath them trembled slightly, and the air grew warm. Small stones lifted, off the ground, floating as if caught in an invisible wind. Neil reached out to touch the glowing pedestal. The runes pulsed with light under his fingers. "This is real," he said. "This is more than a story." Mira's smile faded and she looked around the ruins carefully. "If this is a trial, then maybe it wants to see if we are worthy." Neil nodded. "Then we have to be ready." At that moment, a low rumble echoed through the air, and a hidden door slowly opened on one side of the ruin. Behind the door was a dark passage leading deep into the heart of the ancient structure. Mira took a deep breath. "Well, it looks like we don't have much choice. Let's go." Neil smiled and stepped toward the entrance. Together, the two friends entered the dark tunnel, their footsteps echoing on the cold stone floor. The passage was narrow and winding, lit only by the soft glow from the walls. After a few minutes of walking, they reached a large chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols and pictures of people from long ago. In the center of the room was a pedestal, but no sword this time, just a riddle carved into the stone. Mira bent down and read the words aloud. "To those who seek the sword's true might, prove your heart is just and right. Only the brave and pure of soul may grasp the power and reach the goal." Neil looked at her, his eyes shining. "It means the sword is not just about strength. It wants to see who is worthy." Mira nodded slowly. "Maybe it's about who has the right heart." They both looked at each other, feeling a new respect for the challenge ahead. Suddenly, the chamber began to change. The floor opened up, revealing a deep pit below. Across the pit, another door appeared, glowing faintly. Neil looked at the gap and then at Mira. "We have to get across." Mira smiled. "Looks like the trial is just beginning." She searched the room quickly and found two sturdy vines hanging from the ceiling. "We can use these to swing across," Neil caught one vine, and Mira grabbed the other. They swung one at a time, landing safely on the other side. When they reached the glowing door, it opened slowly. Inside, they saw a strange machine with many moving parts. It looked complicated, but Neil's curiosity was strong. Mira said, "Maybe this machine is part of the test." Neil studied the machine carefully. There were buttons and levers, but no instructions. He pressed a button, and suddenly, a holographic image appeared. It showed a story of an ancient people who created the sword. The image explained that the sword was made to protect the galaxy from harm, but only a person with courage, kindness, and wisdom could use it. Mira watched the image in silence. So it's not just about pulling the sword. We need to show who we really are. Neil smiled. Then we must be honest with ourselves and each other. They left the chamber and continued deeper into the ruins. The air grew colder, and the path became more difficult. But Neil and Mira felt stronger, knowing they faced the trial not as enemies, but as friends. Finally, after many steps, they reached a large room where the sword waited again on the pedestal. Neil stepped forward and tried to pull the sword once more. This time, the sword moved a little but did not come free. Mira smiled softly and said, "Maybe it wants to see if you give up." Neil shook his head. "I won't." Mira stood beside him, her eyes bright. "Neither will I." Together they looked at the sword, knowing this was just the start of something much bigger than they had imagined. The sword's blade gleamed faintly in the soft light of the ruin's chamber. Neil's hands gripped the handle tightly, his eyes fixed on the cold metal. The sword moved slightly, just enough to show it was not impossible to pull, but it remained, firmly stuck in its place. Mira stood beside him, her expression serious now. The earlier laughter had disappeared, replaced by a quiet curiosity. She traced her fingers over the glowing runes carved into the pedestal, reading the ancient language slowly. "This writing, it's telling a story," she said. "About the sword's true purpose. It's not just a weapon, it's a key to protect something very important." Neil looked up at her, surprised. "A key? To what?" Mira shook her head. "I don't know yet, but I think the ancient people who built this place wanted to keep something safe. Maybe a secret or a power." Neil nodded. "Then it's not just about strength or courage. We have to understand what the sword means." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled again. The light from the runes on the pedestal grew brighter, casting dancing shadows on the walls. From somewhere deep, in the ruin, a low sound began. A soft hum that grew louder and filled the chamber. Mira took a step back, her eyes wide. "The trial is starting." Neil felt his heart beat faster, but he stood firm. "We're ready." Without warning, the walls around them shifted. Panels of stone slid apart, revealing hidden doorways. The chamber transformed into a maze filled with twisting corridors and strange symbols glowing faintly on the floor. Mira looked at the new paths with wonder. This is more than a trial of strength. It's a test of mind and spirit. Neil smiled. "Then let's be smart." They stepped carefully into the maze. The air smelled of earth and old stones. Every step echoed softly. The glowing symbols on the floor seemed to move as if alive, changing the path ahead. As they walked, they came across a large wall with a puzzle carved into it. The wall was covered in different shapes, circles, triangles, and squares, each one glowing in a different color. Neil studied the shapes. "This must be the first challenge." Mira nodded. "Look at the patterns on the floor. Maybe they tell us which shapes to press." They worked together, stepping on the glowing symbols on the floor in the correct order. Each time they pressed a shape on the wall, it lit up. Suddenly, the wall opened, revealing a small room filled with floating orbs of light. The orbs swirled around them like tiny stars. Mira reached out to touch one. As her fingers brushed the orb, a warm feeling spread through her body. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Neil smiled. "Maybe the orbs are a sign that we're on the right path." One orb floated closer to Neil and touched his forehead lightly. Suddenly, his mind was filled with images, ancient battles, peaceful villages, and faces of people long gone. He gasped softly. "These are memories from the past." Mira looked amazed. "The sword's trial is showing us the history of the people who made it." Neil nodded slowly. "And maybe it wants us to learn from their stories." They left the room, feeling connected to the ancient world in a way they never expected. The maze led them to another chamber, darker and colder than the last. In the center stood a tall figure made of shining light. It looked like a guardian, holding a staff with symbols that matched the sword's runes. The guardian spoke, its voice calm and strong. "To prove your worthiness, you must answer this. What is the true meaning of strength?" Neil stepped forward, thinking carefully. "Strength is not just power. It is the courage to protect others and the wisdom to use power with care." Mira smiled softly. "It is also kindness, helping those in need, even when it is hard." The guardian's light grew brighter, then slowly faded. "You have answered well." A door opened behind the guardian, revealing a path leading deeper into the ruins. Neil and Mira exchanged looks, their respect for each other growing. The trial was testing more than their muscles. It was testing their hearts. As they walked through the new passage, Mira said quietly, "I was wrong to mock you earlier. This is real, and it's harder than I thought." Neil smiled kindly. "We learn together. That makes us stronger." The passage opened into a large hall filled with ancient machines, their surfaces covered in dust and glowing faintly. The machines hummed softly as if waiting for something. Mira examined one closely. "These machines are part of the trial, too." Neil touched a control panel. Lights flashed, and a holographic map appeared, showing the planet and the ruins in detail. Mira pointed at the map. "Look, there are other places like this. The sword's power is connected to all of them." Neil's eyes shone with excitement. "We must protect these places. The trial is preparing us for something bigger." Suddenly, the machines around them started to glow brighter. The walls shook lightly again. "We need to move," Neil said. "The trial is changing." They hurried toward the exit, but the door slammed shut behind them. The floor beneath began to rise slowly, lifting them into the air. Mira's heart raced. "What is this?" Neil smiled with calm courage. "Another test. The trial is making sure we don't give up." The room transformed again, now a huge chamber filled with puzzles, lights, and moving platforms. The sword's glow was stronger here, as if calling to them. Together, Neil and Mira worked through the challenges, solving puzzles, crossing, moving bridges, and avoiding traps designed to test their patience and teamwork. At one point, Mira slipped on a platform and almost fell. Neil caught her hand quickly. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "Always," he replied. Their bond grew stronger with every step. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a quiet space at the center of the chamber. The sword on. Its pedestal glowed more brightly than ever. Neil reached out again, feeling the power hum through the air. He pulled with all his strength, but the sword only moved slightly. Mira stepped closer and looked at him. "Maybe it's not about pulling it alone." Neil nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "We must face this trial together." They stood side by side, hands touching the sword's handle. Suddenly, the sword lifted smoothly from the pedestal, glowing with light that filled the room. Mira's eyes widened. She fell to her knees in awe, amazed by the moment and what it meant. Neil held the sword high, feeling the power and responsibility flow through him. The trial was not over, but they had passed the first great test. Together, they looked out from the ancient ruin, ready for the journey ahead. The glowing sword was finally free from its ancient pedestal. The light from its blade filled the chamber, casting long shadows on the worn stone walls. Neil held the sword carefully, feeling its warmth spread through his hands. Mira watched, in silence, still on her knees, her eyes wide with awe. For a moment, the two friends simply stood there, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. This sword was not just a tool or a weapon, it was something more, a symbol of trust, honor, and great responsibility. Mira finally stood up, brushing dust from her clothes. "I never believed this could happen," she said quietly. "I mocked you when you first tried, but now I see how strong you really are." Neil smiled softly. It wasn't just about strength. It was about patience, respect, and understanding. Mira nodded slowly. "I was wrong to doubt you. Maybe I was afraid of what the sword means." Neil looked at her with kindness. "You don't have to be afraid. We're in this together." As they prepared to leave the chamber, a soft rumble echoed through the ruins. The walls began to shift again, revealing a new path behind the pedestal. A narrow stairway carved from stone led upward into darkness. "The trial is not over," Mira said, gripping Neil's arm lightly. "There is more to discover." Neil nodded. "Then let's keep going." The two climbed the winding stairs, the air growing cooler as they rose higher. At the top, they found themselves in a large hall filled with holographic images that floated like ghosts in the air. These images showed scenes from the ancient world, people working, building, and celebrating. They also showed moments of struggle, loss, and hope. Mira reached out and touched one image. It shimmered and changed, showing a young woman who looked brave and kind. "This must be one of the people who protected the sword long ago," Mira said. Neil studied the images closely. They were not just warriors. They cared for others. They believed in peace. A sudden noise broke their attention. From a shadowed corner of the hall, a small device hummed to life. It projected a message in a language neither Neil nor Mira had heard before. But somehow, they understood its meaning. The message was clear. Only those who carry the heart of kindness and the courage to protect may wield the power of the sword. Mira looked at Neil. "It is more than a test of strength. It is a test of character." Neil smiled. "I believe we are ready." They moved through the hall, the sword's light guiding their way. At the end of the passage, they found a large door covered in symbols similar to those on the sword. Neil placed the sword against the door. The runes on the door glowed, and slowly the door opened, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Inside, the walls were lined with ancient machines and devices. Some looked like tools, others like machines that could move on their own. In the center of the room stood a large console with glowing buttons and screens. Mira stepped forward and examined the console. These machines must have helped the people who built the sword. Maybe they protected the planet or held its secrets. Neil nodded. "We should be careful. The sword chose us for a reason." As they explored the room, they heard a soft voice echo in the chamber. "Welcome, chosen ones," it said. "You have proven your worth to the sword. Now, you must prove your worth to the planet." A holographic figure appeared above the console. An elder of the ancient people, dressed in flowing robes. "You have passed the first trial," the elder said. "But the power you seek is tied to the well-being of Viridian. Dark forces are approaching, and only those who understand the true meaning of strength can protect this world." Neil and Mira exchanged a look. The challenge was greater than they had imagined. "What must we do?" Mira asked. The elder's image smiled kindly. Work together to awaken the ancient defenses of Viridian. Only through cooperation and respect for all living things can the balance be restored. Neil stepped forward, feeling the weight of the sword at his side. We will do our best. Mira nodded. Together. The hologram faded, leaving the chamber quiet except for the soft hum of the machines. Neil and Mira began to work, pressing buttons and moving levers. Slowly, the machines came to life. Giant panels on the walls shifted, revealing hidden passages and new pathways. As they moved deeper into the chamber, they found themselves facing puzzles and challenges designed to test their teamwork. At one point, a large platform blocked their way. Mira noticed a control panel with 2 levers. "It needs 2 people," she said, looking at Neil. "If we don't work together, we can't open the door." Neil smiled. "Then we'll do it." They pulled the levers at the same time, and the platform began to move, slowly rising and opening a path forward. As they continued, they found more signs that the ancient people valued kindness, teamwork, and respect above all else. Mira looked at Neil. "I think the sword's power comes from how we treat each other," Neil agreed. "If we can't work as one, the sword is useless." Hours passed as they faced more tests, puzzles, mazes, and challenges that demanded patience and trust. At one moment, Mira slipped while climbing a narrow ledge, but Neil caught her hand quickly. "Thank you," she said, smiling. "We're stronger together," Neil replied. By the time they reached the chamber's heart, they were no longer just friends. They were partners, bound by respect and trust. In the center of the room stood a large crystal, glowing softly. The swords. Light grew brighter as Neil approached the crystal. He raised the sword and touched the crystal with its tip. Suddenly, the chamber filled with light, and the crystal's glow spread across the walls. The machines hummed louder, and the air felt charged with energy. Mira watched with wide eyes. "The planet is waking up." Neil nodded. "We've done what the trial asked, but this is only the beginning." As the light faded, the chamber doors opened, revealing a path back to the surface. Neil and Mira stepped out into the warm sunlight, the sword shining at Neil's side. Mira looked at the horizon. "Viridian is safe, for now." Neil smiled. "And we have the power and the friendship to protect it." Together, they began their journey back to the world beyond the ruins, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Neil and Mira stepped out of the ancient ruins, the sunlight warm on their faces. The sword still glowed softly at Neil's side, a quiet reminder of the power and responsibility they had been given. But both knew their journey was far from over. "We have the sword?" Mira said thoughtfully. "But what now?" "The trial said there is a final test." Neil nodded. "Yes. We passed the challenges inside the ruins, but this sword, this power, it's not just about us. It's about what we will do with it." They looked out over the vast landscape of Viridian. The planet was beautiful. Rolling hills, sparkling rivers, and forests filled with strange but peaceful creatures. But beneath the calm, they could feel a deeper challenge waiting. "Let's go back to the village," Neil suggested. "We need to prepare." The village was small but lively, filled with people who had heard the legends of the sword and the ancient protectors. As Neil and Mira arrived, the villagers greeted them with respect and hope. An elder approached them, a kind-faced woman named Laura. She studied the sword carefully. "You have passed the trials, but the final test will come soon. The power you hold must be used wisely." Mira smiled. "We want to protect Viridian and everyone on it." Laura nodded. "That is the heart of the trial. Strength is nothing without kindness and wisdom." That evening, around a warm fire, Laura shared stories of the past. She told of a time when the ancient protectors faced a great darkness, not just from outside forces, but from fear and anger within themselves. The final test, she said softly, is a test of the soul, to prove that you can use the sword's power not for glory or gain, but to protect and to heal. Neil and Mira listened closely. The trial was more than physical challenges. It was about their character and choices. The next morning, as the sun rose, a sudden tremor shook the ground. The villagers looked toward the distant mountains, where a dark cloud had begun to form. "The darkness is coming," Laura said. "You must be ready." Neil tightened his grip on the sword. "We will face it. Together." Mira nodded. "We have to." They set out toward the mountains, following the path of the gathering shadow. As they traveled, they talked about what the final test might mean. "Maybe it will ask us to choose between power and mercy," Mira said, "or between fear and hope." Neil agreed. "The sword is a symbol of balance. We must remember that." The closer they got, the heavier the air felt. The creatures of the forest grew quiet, as if sensing the coming change. At the mountain's base, they found a dark cave. The entrance was covered in strange markings, warnings and symbols of protection. "This must be the place," Neil said. Inside, the cave was cool and dark. They moved carefully, their steps echoing on the stone floor. Suddenly, a voice filled the cave, soft but clear. "Who comes seeking the power of the sword?" Neil stepped forward, holding the glowing blade. "We come to protect, not to harm," the voice replied. "To prove your worth, you must face your own fears." A mist rose from the cave floor, swirling around them. Images appeared in the fog, visions of failure, loss, and loneliness. Mira saw herself alone, unable to help the people she cared about. Neil saw the sword slipping from his grasp, its power lost to darkness. They both felt the weight of doubt, but they stood strong. "We cannot let fear control us," Neil said firmly. Mira smiled with courage. "We have each other. That makes us stronger." The mist faded, and the cave brightened. At the far end, a pedestal appeared, holding another sword, this one plain, but shining with a quiet light. "The final test," the voice said. "Choose wisely." Neil and Mira looked at each other. "This sword is not like the first," Mira said. "It does not glow with power, but with calm." Neil nodded. "Maybe this is the true test, to choose humility over pride." They stepped forward together and lifted the plain sword from its place. The cave filled with light, and the voice spoke again. "You have shown strength, courage, and wisdom. You have chosen the path of the protector." Outside the cave, the dark cloud began to fade, replaced by sunlight and clear skies. The villagers welcomed Neil and Mira back as heroes, not for the power they held, but for the hearts they showed. Neil looked at Mira and smiled. The trial was more than just the sword. It was about who we are, Mira nodded, and what we choose to be. Together they knew their journey was only beginning, but with kindness, courage, and trust, they were ready to face whatever the future held. The sun was high in the sky, casting warm light over the quiet village on Viridian. Neil and Mira sat by a small stream, the sword resting beside them. Its glow was soft now, as if waiting patiently for the right moment. Mira watched Neil quietly, a new feeling growing inside her. She remembered how she had mocked him when he first tried to pull the sword, full of doubt and laughter. But now she saw something different, a quiet strength, a calm confidence that came from within. "Neil," she said softly, "when you pulled the sword free, I didn't expect it. I thought it would be impossible." Neil smiled gently. "Neither did I, but it wasn't just about strength, it was about what we believe in." Mira looked down at the sword. "I fell to my knees in awe. It wasn't just the sword's power, it was your heart." Neil's eyes met hers. "The sword chooses more than muscle. It chooses character, kindness, courage, patience. Mira nodded slowly. I want to be like that, strong but humble. Neil reached out and took her hand. You already are. As they sat by the stream, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying a feeling of peace. But deep inside, both knew the true test was still ahead. Later that day, the village elder Laura invited them to a gathering. The villagers had come together to hear the story of the ancient sword and the new protectors. Laura spoke with warmth in her voice. The sword has chosen Neil and Mira not only for their courage but for their hearts. Their journey shows us that true strength comes from respect and kindness. The villagers listened closely, their eyes shining with hope. After the gathering, Neil and Mira walked together through the village square. Mira looked at the people around them, families, children, and elders, all trusting them to keep their world safe. It's a big responsibility, she said quietly. Neil nodded. Yes, but it is also a great honor. As evening fell, they returned to the ruins where their journey had begun. The sword's glow grew stronger, lighting the stones around them. Suddenly, a soft voice filled the air, the voice of the ancient guardian who had first tested them. You have passed the trial of the sword, the voice said gently, but now the power within you must grow. Neil and Mira looked at each other, feeling a new strength rising inside. The sword lifted from Neil's hand and floated between them, shining like a star. Together, you will learn to wield this power, the voice continued. Not for battle or glory, but to protect and to heal. Mira reached out and touched the sword. A warm light filled her, spreading from her fingertips through her whole body. Neil felt the same, a calm energy filling his mind and heart. The sword's light formed a circle around them, connecting their spirits in a bond stronger than words. Mira smiled, tears in her eyes. I never imagined this. Neil squeezed her hand. Neither did I, but I am glad we face it together. As the light faded, the sword returned to Neil's side, its glow steady and peaceful. The next morning, Neil and Mira began their training with the sword. They learned to listen to its power, to move with patience and care. The villagers joined them, eager to learn how to protect their home with respect for life and nature. Days turned into weeks as Neil and Mira grew stronger, not just in skill, but in heart. One afternoon, while practicing near the forest edge, they heard a distant sound, a call for help. Without hesitation, they ran toward the noise, the sword's glow lighting their path. At the clearing, they found a group of villagers, trapped by a fallen tree. The heavy branches blocked the way, and no one could move it alone. Neil stepped forward, holding the sword steady. Watch, he said softly. He focused on the sword's power, feeling the calm energy within. Slowly, the sword's light grew, brighter, shining on the branches. With gentle force, the branches began to lift, as if guided by an invisible hand. Mira helped the villagers move through the clearing safely. When the last person was free, the sword's light faded, returning to its peaceful glow. The villagers cheered, their faces filled with gratitude. Mira looked at Neil, amazed. The sword helps us, but only when we use it with kindness. Neil nodded. That's the true power. That evening, as the sun set, Neil and Mira sat again by the stream. Mira spoke quietly. I never expected to feel this way. Humble, strong, and hopeful. Neil smiled. That is the way of the protector. She looked at him and said, Thank you for showing me the true meaning of strength. Neil replied, Thank you for believing, even when it was hard. Together they watched the stars appear in the sky, ready for whatever the future would bring. The days on Viridian passed peacefully, but Neil and Mira knew that calm would not last forever. The sword's glow was steady at Neil's side, a reminder of the great power they had been entrusted with, and the responsibility it carried. Morning. As the two stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the vast valley below, Mira noticed something unusual. Far in the distance, a faint, dark shadow moved against the bright green hills. "Neil," she said quietly, pointing. "Look, something is coming." Neil followed her gaze. "I see it. We should investigate." They hurried down the rocky path toward the valley, their footsteps quick and sure. As they neared, the shadow grew larger, a strange cloud of darkness that seemed to swallow the light around it. The villagers nearby stopped their work, looking toward the sky with worry. The shadow was unlike anything they had seen before. Laura, the village elder, approached Neil and Mira. "The darkness is here. The power you carry will be needed." Neil gripped the sword's handle, feeling its familiar warmth. "We will protect Viridian." Mira nodded. "Together." As the dark cloud moved closer, the ground beneath their feet trembled. Strange shapes began to emerge, creatures formed from shadows, but they moved slowly and without anger. Neil stepped forward. "They don't want to fight. Maybe they're lost or confused," Mira agreed. "Let's try to understand them before we act." Neil raised the sword carefully. The blade shone brighter, its light pushing back against the darkness. Suddenly, the creatures stopped and turned toward the sword's glow. Slowly, their shapes softened, and the darkness around them began to fade. Mira smiled. "The sword's power can calm, not just fight." Neil moved closer, speaking softly. "We don't want to hurt you. We want to help." The creatures know. Longer, shadowy, and frightening, changed into peaceful beings made of light and energy. They nodded gently and moved away from the village, disappearing into the valley. The villagers sighed in relief. Laura looked at Neil and Mira with pride. "You have shown the true power of the sword, compassion and understanding." That night, as the stars twinkled overhead, Neil and Mira sat by the fire, the sword glowing softly between them. Mira spoke quietly. "The power inside the sword is greater than we thought. It can heal and bring peace." Neil smiled. "It reflects what we carry in our hearts." Suddenly, the sword's glow grew stronger, pulsing like a heartbeat. Light spread from the blade, filling the clearing with warmth. Neil felt a surge of energy. He raised the sword toward the sky, and a beam of light shot upward, connecting the earth to the stars. The villagers watched in wonder as the light spread across the land, touching trees, rivers, and mountains. It was as if the planet itself was waking up. Mira looked at Neil, eyes shining. "The sword is more than a weapon. It's a link between us and the world." Neil nodded. "It shows us how connected everything is." The next day, Neil and Mira explored the nearby forest, following the path of the sword's light. They came across a small clearing where the plants seemed dry and weak. The earth was cracked, and the air felt heavy. Mira knelt down and touched the soil. "The land needs help." Neil raised the sword again, and a soft light spread from its blade onto the ground. Slowly, the cracks began to heal, and new green. Shoots appeared. The trees grew taller, and the air became fresh and clean. Mira smiled. "The sword's power can heal the planet." Neil looked around, hope filling his heart. "We are its guardians now." As days passed, Neil and Mira used the sword's light to protect the village and the land. They helped animals find safe homes and healed injured plants, but they also knew that the sword's true power was not just in magic, it was in their choice to use it with kindness and care. One evening, as the sun set, Neil and Mira stood at the top of a hill, watching the sky turn gold and pink. Mira spoke softly. "The sword has changed us." Neil smiled. "And we have changed with it." She looked at him and said, Together we can face anything. Neil took her hand gently. Together, always. The sword's glow surrounded them, a symbol of hope and unity. With hearts full of courage and kindness, Neil and Mira prepared for whatever new adventures awaited. The power of the sword was theirs, but more important was the power inside themselves. The skies over Viridian were bright and clear as Neil and Mira stood on a high hill overlooking the peaceful valley below. The sword, now a steady light at Neil's side, seemed to glow with quiet strength, like a promise kept. The journey they had traveled was long and filled with many lessons. From the moment Neil first tried to pull the sword, through the trials inside the ancient ruins, to the challenges outside with the shadowy creatures, they had grown in more ways than they could count. Mira looked at Neil, her eyes full of respect and friendship. "We have come far. I remember when I mocked your first attempt. Now I see the truth in your heart." Neil smiled gently, "And I learned to be patient and humble." We grew together. Around them, the villagers of Viridian worked happily, caring for the land and each other. The power of the sword had brought not only strength but unity. Laura, the village elder, approached them, her face calm and kind. "You have done well, both of you. The sword chose wisely." Neil nodded. "But the real work begins now." Laura smiled. "Yes. The sword's power is a gift. It must be used every day with care, respect, and courage." Mira added, "We will protect Viridian and all who live here." The sun began to set, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. The peaceful moment held a quiet promise of the future. Suddenly, a soft light appeared on the horizon. It was not the sword's glow, but something new, a message carried on the wind. Laura took a deep breath. "There are others beyond this world who need help. The sword's power may be needed in far places." Neil and Mira exchanged looks. Their adventure was only beginning. "We will go," Neil said, "wherever the sword leads us." Mira smiled. Together, that night, under a sky full of stars, the village gathered to celebrate. Music and laughter filled the air. The story of Neil and Mira's journey was told again, inspiring hope and courage. As the firelight flickered, Mira whispered to Neil, "Do you think we are ready?" Neil looked at the sword resting beside them. "We are not just ready. We are stronger, because we chose kindness over fear and courage over doubt." Mira nodded. "The sword showed us that true strength comes from the heart." The next morning, with the blessing of the village, Neil and Mira prepared to leave Viridian. They carried the sword, a symbol of their promise to protect and heal, but also a reminder of their bond. As they stepped into the unknown, the path ahead was uncertain, but their hearts were full of hope. "Wherever we go," Mira said, "we will carry this light." Neil smiled. "And together, we will face whatever comes." The sword's glow shone bright, guiding them into a new chapter. Thus, story of the sword and its chosen protectors had only just begun.